Hey guys, Chase with Sherpa Equipment Company. Today we're going to be installing our Snowmass rack on this 5th gen RAV4. If you guys haven't already seen our video of dropping the headliner and removing the factory rack, click on the link in the description. We'll take you to that. This also does not work with the panoramic roof option from Toyota on this vehicle. So first we're going to go over what you're going to receive in your package from us. You're going to have your crossbars, your side plates, your wind fairing, all your hardware for your wind fairing, your mounting rubber, some rubber plugs, and your mounting feet. You're also going to be reusing the nuts from the factory roof rack that will go inside the vehicle. You will also have some silicone or sealant of some sort and some blue thread locker. And to start off this install, we're going to take our rubber plugs and we're going to head to the top of the vehicle and install these first. Okay, so now we're up top of the vehicle. You're going to notice that you have 9 exposed holes on either side of the vehicle. Some of these will be plugged with our rubber plugs and some of them will be covered and used for our mounting feet for our rack. So we're going to be referring to these holes as 1 through 9, 1 being the first towards the hood and 9 being the furthest back. The holes that are going to be plugged are going to be 1, 4, 5, 7, and 8. So you'll notice the rubber plugs that we send you, you're going to have 10 total. You'll have 8 which are smaller and then 2 wider plugs. These wider plugs are going to be used for hole 7 on either side. So we'll go ahead and get those in first and install the rest after. So when installing this plug, all you're going to want to do is use a small circle of silicone around the existing hole, and then you're going to push your plug into the hole, making sure it snugs all the way down to the roof of the vehicle. Now you're going to take your remaining 4 for this side, and again, you're going to be putting these in hole 1, 4, 5, and 8. So now that all of your unused holes are plugged on your roof with our rubber plugs, we're going to grab our mounting rubber and take those to the roof next. Now that we have our rubber, you're going to notice that you have 4 of the same size with 1 hole in it, and then you're going to have 2 long ones. These 2 long ones are going to be going up in holes 2 and 3, and you should be able to line it up and see the holes in your roof. To the other side, and then these do not matter, not side specific whatsoever. Just line that hole up and do the same on hole 9. Now we're going to do the same thing on the other side. So now before putting our mounts up on the rubber, we're going to install our bonded washers onto our long M8 hex bolts. To do this, you're simply going to slide your bonded washer all the way up to the head, and we're going to do this on all 8 bolts. Bonded washers are installed on our M8 hardware. We can set that aside, and we'll be installing our mounts onto our crossbars next. Now we're going to be installing the mounts onto the crossbars. So you're going to want to grab 3 crossbars and your mounting feet. You'll notice all your mounting feet are labeled. You got your fronts, middles, and rears. You're going to obviously want to make sure those goes on the same crossbars. And to install these mounts, what you have to do is take 4 T-nuts per crossbar, drop them into the slots. It does not really matter where you put these during this step. We'll adjust later. But you can set your T-nuts in, grab 2 of your mounts and your hardware, and we're going to tighten these down, but just finger tight, so you can still move the mount back and forth on the crossbar for the adjustability later. We're going to repeat this step for the remaining mounts. Now we'll take our crossbars up to the roof with our mounting hardware, and we'll get these installed. Last crossbar. So one thing you want to make sure before you put your bolts in and get everything tightened down is that your mounts are facing the right direction. You'll notice on the bottom face of our mount, you're going to have one corner that's slightly notched. That notch will always face the front of the vehicle. If you see on your middle mounts, they don't have any notches. That means there's no side specific. It can go either way. So once you're sure that all your mounts are facing the right direction, you can take your hardware and simply drop it through. We'll be installing the nuts on the back of these here shortly, but this will hold everything in place until we get everything set up. So now that all of our hardware is run through our mounting feet, we're going to take the factory nuts that came with the factory rack. We're going to put a little bit of blue Loctite on this, and this is just because once your headliner goes back in, you're not going to have access to the hardware to tighten it back up if it does become loose. So we want to make sure that will stay tight. Once you've applied a little bit of blue Loctite to each of these, we'll take them to the inside of the vehicle and get them installed. Okay, so now we're going to be installing these nuts onto the bolts coming through the roof. So you'll see them poking through in your different locations. You're going to want to get it tight just by your fingers, or just finger tight for right now. We'll be tightening these down with some wrenches later, but the tighter you get it now with your fingers, it's going to make it easier down the road. So now we're going to do the same process on the remaining bolts in the rest of the car. Another helpful thing when you're doing this is reach around the outside of the car at the same time and just keep your finger on the bolt head. That way it's not spinning with you while you try to tighten these down. So now all of our hardware is just finger tight. You're going to grab two 13mm wrenches, a socket and a wrench. Definitely recommend using at least one wrench. And you're going to get the wrench on the underside of the roof, and you're going to find that factory nut, and you're going to tighten down on the bolts. A good way to tell when these are tight is when that bonded washer just becomes flat. You don't want to over tighten these. If you over tighten these, you can ruin the watertight integrity seal. So now that the mounting feet are tightened down to the roof, we're going to move to the next step, which is centering up our crossbars. To do this, we like to grab a tape measure and measure from the inside edge of the mounting foot that touches the crossbar to the outside edge of the crossbar. And you'll try to get this number to be the same on both sides. That's how you know your rack is centered. We've already centered this one, and a good starting place is about 6 3/4 for the back crossbar, about 5 1/4 for the middle crossbar, and then on the front crossbar, about 4 inches. You're going to want to measure these all yourself. This is just a good starting point. All roofs are a little bit different, and your mounting feet could have a little bit of different numbers with that. So once our crossbars are centered up, we'll go ahead, grab our 7/16 wrench and tighten down all of the hardware going into the bottom of the crossbar. When you're tightening down the hardware into your crossbars, it's important, again, to not over tighten them. It doesn't take a whole lot for these T-nuts to bite, so what I'll do is I'll tighten down until you hear it start to bite and give it a little bit more, and then you're set. So everything is now tight on top of the vehicle, and we can move forward to installing our side plates. This is a step that it's helpful to have another person help you if you have that available. However, you can do it by yourself. You just have to be careful. If you are doing it by yourself, what I like to do is grab 2 of your socket button bolts and quarter washers, grab one of your side plates, and just start with that. I always like to set a rag up on the front of the vehicle just to protect the paint if it does end up touching it during the installation. But to start, I'll just take one of my socket buttons, set the other to the side, and I'm going to start in the back and just line it up with your rear slot and get this bolt started just by hand. No need to go crazy. Once that one's there, it'll hold the back up. You can grab your other socket button and then get the front started the same way you did with the rear. No need to position forward and back yet. We'll just get the remaining hardware in and we can adjust from there. So after we got our initial 2 bolts in, you can go ahead and put the remaining bolts into your crossbars, and then we're going to put the side plate up the same way on the other side. Okay, so now that all of your bolts are loosely installed onto your crossbars, you can now adjust your rack backwards or forwards to find the correct fitment. And pretty much the only thing you want to do here is look at the curve of the vehicle, look at the bottom of the rack, and match them up as close as you can. All of our racks are designed to fit the vehicle that they're on. So once you're happy with the curve of the rack matching the curve of the vehicle, you can go ahead and tighten down the bolts that go into the crossbars. So now our driver's side plate is lined up. We're going to do the same thing on the passenger side, and then we'll be installing the crossbars. Our side plates are tight on both sides now. So we're going to take our crossbars. We'll set one aside for the fairing. We'll be installing that last. And then we'll take our remaining crossbars up to the roof and get them installed. The spacing on this rack with the remaining 4 crossbars will go 1 crossbar in each one of these slots. This can be changed though, depending on what you plan on using your rack for or mounting to it. So we'll go ahead and just install it though that way, just to give it the even spacing. And to do this, you'll just install your remaining socket button bolts into your crossbars on both sides and tighten down. Okay. I personally like to leave the socket buttons loose on all my crossbars. That way at the end I can space them out to get them as even as possible. Don't need to do this, but helpful step. Okay, so now that we're satisfied with our crossbar placement, I'm going to go ahead and tighten down all of the bolts on one side. This will automatically kind of square the crossbars up for the other side, and then I'll tighten down that side. Okay, so now that all the crossbars are tight on the rack, we'll move to our final step, which is installing the fairing. You should only have a small pile of hardware left. We'll be using most of the rest of that. So to install the fairing, I like to lay the crossbar out and then lay the fairing out in front of it. I'll get them roughly lined up edge to edge, and then I'll take my 6 T-nuts and I'll kind of make invisible lines from the mounting holes to the crossbar, and I'll drop the T-nuts in line with those holes. This doesn't need to be exact, you can adjust later. And then once we get all the T-nuts in, we'll grab our remaining short socket button bolts, set our fairing up onto the crossbar, and I usually begin with finding the middle T-nuts. So I'll slide the fairing over the crossbar until I expose my T-nuts in the track below, and then get my hardware started into the T-nut just loosely, and then continue on to do the same with the remaining 4 holes. All right, so now all of our bolts are started into our T-nuts. Now we can center up the fairing onto the crossbar. Simply slide it until you feel both ends are flush with the end of the crossbar. Once you're flush, go ahead and tighten down the socket buttons. So finally, we can install our fairing. I'm going to take our rag again and our 4 remaining socket button bolts with their black 1/4-inch washers and head to the top of the car. You can slide your fairing up, resting it on your roof on the other side. So now that the bolts are installed in the fairing crossbar loosely, you can slide this up and down until your edge trim sits about flush with the bottom of your side plate. And then just tighten one down for now. We'll come back and adjust the proper height after, and we'll do the same thing on the other side. So we got this side loosely installed as well, so we're just going to, again, line up the bottom of the edge trim with the bottom of the side plate. Once we're happy with the position, snug that down, and we'll go back and make sure it's still sitting in the right position on the other side. But it looks like it is, and it should be sitting about a 1/4 inch off the roof. You do not want this resting on your paint. If it is, that means somewhere along the installation something went wrong. Your rack might be sitting too far forward, too far back. So if it's in the right position, it should be sitting about a 1/4 inch off your roof. Now that the installation of the rack on the vehicle is complete, it's a good idea to walk around, make sure all your hardware is tight, double check the 8 nuts inside. You want to make sure those are tight before putting on your headliner. You will no longer have access to those once that is reinstalled. As far as reinstalling your headliner and your interior goes, we suggest going to our uninstallation video and just doing the reverse process of that. If you run into any issues with that, or if you run into any issues or concerns with the installation of the rack itself, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can email or call us. We'll be happy to help. Thanks for watching.